Walk through a marketplace roughly 2 millennia ago, and you would hear Greek, Sanskrit, and Persian spoken in the same breath, while merchants casually traded raw Roman gold for rolls of Chinese silk. While Rome and Han China dominated the maps of this era, the specific hub belonged to the largely forgotten Kushan Empire. The Kushans began as the Yuezhi, a nomadic tribe pushed entirely out of the Central Asian steppes by violent, overlapping territorial conflicts. To survive, they migrated as refugees. They pushed through punishing deserts and navigated extreme high-altitude mountain passes until they finally reached the region of Bactria. It is a strange contradiction. A group of displaced people who lived entirely in the saddle managed to construct one of the wealthiest and most culturally integrated states in the ancient world. Once settled across Bactria and northern India, the Kushans realized their location was their greatest strategic asset. This map shows how their borders sat squarely in the middle of the Silk Road. They acted as the essential land bridge connecting Han China, the Roman Empire, and the Indian subcontinent. They positioned themselves as the ultimate middlemen. High-value goods moving west, like patterned Chinese silk or Indian spices, had to pass directly through their territory. In return for this passage, the Kushans absorbed massive quantities of Roman gold, accumulating severe wealth. Managing this influx of foreign merchants and newly conquered locals demanded a specific governance strategy. To avoid constant rebellion, the Kushans chose a path of total cultural assimilation. A minority ruling class of former nomads cannot mandate their own customs across a sprawling, multi-ethnic population without triggering immediate conflict. Instead, they adopted the cultures they conquered. They used their currency to broadcast this fusion directly into the hands of the public. Look closely at this gold coin minted under King Kanishka I. On the left, the king presents Persian royal titles in Greek lettering. Flip it over, and it features the standing Buddha. Minting Indian deities signaled religious tolerance to their diverse subjects. Even their royal portraiture followed suit. The stone carving blends the heavy riding boots of their nomadic past with a formal, localized royal tunic. The Kushans kept the peace by reflecting their subjects' identities back at them. They effectively told the population, "We are whatever you need us to be." Under King Kanishka I, this strategy of cultural blending reached industrial scales, initiating a golden age. This era shifted religious art, starting with the native Indian Mathura style. These sculptures utilized local red sandstone, focusing on stylized spiritual symbolism. But Kushan patronage ultimately birthed an entirely distinct and revolutionary aesthete: Gandhara art. Gandhara artists created the first human statues of the Buddha using Greco-Roman realism. These figures feature the distinct facial structure of Apollo and wear heavily draped Roman togas. Kanishka sponsored this Mahayana branch of Buddhism, exporting it outward into Central Asia and China. With Kushan backing, Buddhism moved beyond its origins as a regional Indian philosophy to become a highly visual, globally recognized religion. By the 3rd century, the wealth and stability of this era started to fracture. Externally, the rising Sassanid Empire in Persia began pushing against Kushan borders, straining their military resources. An invisible disruption began in the south, as trade routes began moving off the land and onto the sea. Sailors had mapped out the monsoon wind patterns. These seasonal winds allowed Roman and Indian merchants to sail directly across the sea, entirely bypassing the Kushan land routes. Deprived of their geographic monopoly, their economic engines stalled, depleting the wealth necessary to maintain order across their vast territories. The political borders of the Kushans ultimately collapsed, but their cultural footprint remained intact. By merging Greek realism with Indian spirituality, they established a visual language that persists today in the first human statues of the Buddha. The Kushans endured not through military erasure, but through the deliberate exchange and synthesis of ideas. 2,000 years ago, the world was already deeply connected. Far from being isolated kingdoms, Eurasia was linked by a bustling global highway, driven by an intense demand for luxury goods. This map of Eurasia shows the massive volume of trade goods moving across continents. Chinese silk traveled thousands of miles west. Indian pepper, so prized it was known as Yavana Priya, or Passion of the Greeks, flowed outward. In return, Roman gold and Persian silver poured eastward to pay for it all. In the Indian subcontinent, The political landscape was fracturing. The once massive Mauryan Empire had collapsed, and the influence of the Indo-Greeks was rapidly fading. This left a massive power vacuum sitting right in the middle of these lucrative trade routes. Into this void stepped an unlikely group of nomadic refugees. They saw an opportunity and moved to seize control of the world's most profitable toll booth. These refugees were the Yuezhi tribe. Originally living in western China, they were violently driven from their homeland by the aggressive Xiongnu Empire, forcing them into a desperate flight westward. They arrived with almost none of the traditional tools of empire building. They had no cities, no written language, and no accumulated wealth. Their entire existence had been tied to the harsh, open steppes, constantly moving with their horses and livestock. After years of migration, they reached Bactria, modern-day Afghanistan and Central Asia. Here, they encountered established Greek-style cities left over from Alexander the Great's campaigns. Instead of pillaging these settlements, the Yuezhi chose to observe, learn, and adapt to urban administration. Because they had no rigid, deeply rooted homeland culture tying them down, they possessed a unique evolutionary advantage. They could easily absorb the administrative, economic, and cultural strengths of every civilization they encountered. Over time, one Yuezhi faction became dominant, the Kushans. Leaders like Kujula Kadphises unified the tribes and aggressively pushed their armies into northern India. In this statue of a Kushan ruler, they retained their nomadic roots, wearing heavy tunics and riding boots, while projecting total imperial authority. They strategically positioned their new borders to overlap exactly with the most critical intersections of the Silk Road. By controlling these treacherous but vital overland passes through the Hindu Kush Mountains, they controlled the flow of the global economy. To streamline this massive trade network, they instituted advanced financial systems. The Kushans issued the purest gold coins in India to date and heavily empowered the Shreni, merchant guilds that set their own laws, regulated prices, and functioned as ancient, highly organized banks holding public deposits. The wealth generated was staggering. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder openly complained about the economic drain, recording that Rome was bleeding 100 million sesterces a year to India to pay for luxury imports. By securing these mountain passes, the Kushans effectively hijacked the global supply chain, turning nomadic mobility into a mechanism for total economic dominance. By the end of the 1st century CE, the empire reached its peak under Emperor Kanishka I. He faced a massive administrative challenge, ruling a vast territory stretching from Central Asia to the Ganges Plain, filled with 1,000 different languages, beliefs, and traditions. Instead of forcing his subjects to adopt a single state religion, Kanishka actively assimilated local cultures. He integrated foreign ideas into his own administration, treating diversity as a tool for stability. This gold cushion coin physically demonstrates that syncretism. Notice the Greek lettering framing the standing ruler on the front. On the reverse side sits a Buddhist deity. The cushions also minted images of Hindu and Zoroastrian gods, all labeled in Greek and Bactrian scripts. By reflecting the identities of all their subjects simultaneously, the cushions practiced a calculated policy of extreme religious and cultural tolerance. It was the most effective way to prevent a highly diverse empire from tearing itself apart from the inside. Kanishka became one of history's greatest patrons of Mahayana Buddhism. He gathered brilliant minds at his court, including the philosopher Ashvaghosha, who helped organize the Fourth Buddhist Council, and Charaka, the royal physician who compiled a massive encyclopedia of ancient Indian medicine. This intellectual gathering also sparked an artistic revolution. First, we have the Mathura style of art, shown in this reddish sandstone sculpture of a seated Buddha. It represents the indigenous Indian tradition, with a focus on a smooth, unadorned physical form. But the Kushan trade routes birthed something entirely new, the Gandhara style. In this gray schist standing Buddha, Greek realism meets an Indian deity. Notice the Apollo-like facial structures, wavy hair, and heavy Greek-style draped robes. This willingness to blend ideas fused Eastern spirituality with Western aesthetics, a stylistic union that would define Buddhist art across Asia for the next millennium. By the 3rd century, the Kushans faced a serious external threat. The Sassanid Empire rose aggressively in Persia, pushing eastward and slowly choking off the Kushans' western borders in Bactria. These massive mud brick fortification walls reflect the sudden, desperate need to defend against Sassanid incursions. At the same time, a devastating technological shift undermined their economy. This map of the Indian Ocean tracks the discovery made by a Greek sailor named Hippalus. He successfully decoded the seasonal monsoon wind patterns, charting a new, direct maritime route from the west straight to the southern Indian coast. Because this ocean route was significantly faster and largely safer from land-based bandits, merchants rapidly adapted. As the animation shows, the bright new maritime routes bypassed the overland Silk Road entirely. An empire built entirely on acting as a geographic bridge inevitably starves when the river of trade changes course. As the overland wealth dried up, the central authority of the Kushans collapsed. The once unified empire fractured, breaking apart into small, independent regional powers. Even though their political power vanished, their cultural footprint survived. You can see this in the Bamiyan Valley, where these massive niches in the sandstone cliffs once held giant Buddha statues, haunting remnants of a time when this region was the prosperous center of the world. Their ultimate achievement was forging a deeply connected Eurasia, under the Kushans, a Greek sculpting a Buddha, funded by Chinese silk and traded for Roman gold. The Kushan legacy demonstrates that an empire built on connecting disparate cultures leaves a far deeper mark on history than one built on cultural erasure.